Welcome. My name is Gavin Stern. I'm editor-in-chief here at AAMI News, and we're coming to you from the HIMSS 2023 conference. So I'm joined by Jackie Gerhart. Jackie's an expert in AI as well as a physician, a clinician. And Jackie, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Sure, great. Thank you so much, Gavin. So I'm a family medicine physician by background, and I've practiced inpatient, outpatient OB, still practice in urgent care currently, and then I work at Epic as the Vice President of Clinical Informatics. And there we work with software developers and other team members to try to help improve workflows for physicians and help make sure that patients are getting the care that they deserve and need.
Great. So I keep hearing this concept that AI can actually help bring patients and clinicians closer together, kind of help move technology a little bit more to the background, which is a little ironic because it's by itself technology.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that idea.
Sure. So when we went to medical school, we all wanted to come up with diagnoses, take care of patients, but it wasn't necessarily our top priority to take care of a bunch of paperwork or to specifically do the menial tasks or the administrative tasks. And over time, that has increased quite a bit. And so because that's increased, that's gotten somewhat in the way of a patient and a provider being able to interact. And what's beautiful about the increase in telemedicine and also having some asynchronous communication during the pandemic, we've been able to actually help empower the patient to ask questions to their patient, and then now using AI, hopefully help with generating those responses to take the burden off the clinician, but also allow that connection with the patient.
Gotcha. Can you tell me a little bit about, so you're talking about generative responses, so generative AI.
Yeah.
How does that work exactly?
Sure. So when you're using generative AI, you can do it either through a service. In this case, Epic is using Microsoft Azure's OpenAI service. And the idea is that when the AI sees the question from the patient, it can then generate a response that is similar to responses that it has learned before from either other clinicians or from their data set specifically. And then it'll give you a draft response, and I can either choose to edit that draft response, I can choose to send it as is, or I can actually open up just a blank page and do my own thing that I would have done even before generative AI. Yeah. So the goal is to try to meet everyone where they're at, but also have a human in the loop at all times. And that's one of the most important things right now, since this is such a new technology. We want to make sure that we're using it equitably and that we're able to use it for its best use cases, because there may not be every use case that's the best.
Gotcha. And this was that concept that came up yesterday of where clinicians can be sort of the co-pilot.
Yeah.
Where the AI is doing this first draft, and this way they're not having to remember all these details after the fact, and it's not just about, it improves the patient experience, but also improves even the livelihoods of clinicians who are feeling really burned out.
Yes, exactly. So when I think about how AI can be used in clinical care, we just talked about in-basket, so patient messages. When they want to communicate more with their clinician, it'll be helpful to have that generative AI be able to answer more quickly, more expediently, and also put in some of the wording that a clinician would usually use. But that's just sort of the one case. And we're actually starting that now. We just rolled it out to 3 of our customers, so they're doing the pilots of it. So just a few clinicians at each of the customers are trying it. We've gotten really good reviews so far, so we're excited how that's going to go. But there's 3 other ones. So in-basket's important. Documentation we talked a little bit about yesterday too, which is, we typically we are taught in medical school to write voluminous notes, and they're not always helpful for us or even for the patient who's now a reader of their own notes. And so how is it that we can use generative AI and maybe even pair it with voice technology to get a note done right and well exactly in that exam room so that you don't have to review it later? So I'd see in-basket, documentation. Then you were mentioning almost foraging. So how is it that we can curate and collate my prior notes, information from throughout the chart, and put it into a place that I can have it just when I'm ready for it. So be able to review without going into multiple different places and collate all of that for the clinician is a huge deal. And then the last one that I'm actually one of probably most excited about is, as we think about doing and using data, how can we engage and a generative AI model to be able to actually help us as clinicians think about research questions, think about problems, and then respond back and forth so that we're learning. So for example, previously in Epic, there's a tool called Slice or Dicer, and I might have, done the slicing and dicing myself, but now we can either use your voice or we can type and say, please break this population down by people with COVID and not with COVID. Then break it down by this and this. And you can keep going more minute. And you can even say, is there anything else that's interesting about this population that I might have missed? So those things are the ones that are coming in the future, whereas in-basket is where we're kind of starting.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been hearing of this concept at HIMSS where we made it to the sort of the iPhone stage where things are starting to work, but it's still first iPhone. Mm-hmm. So things are still we're not at the point of getting to, today where things just sort of work and it's very slick. It's still being worked on.
Yeah. It's in a similar way, one of our informatics team members, Phil, he describes it as a gold rush, where it's like there's something new and it's really exciting, but it's not just a hype cycle. There is actually gold at the end of this, and we are going to be able to make something good out of it, and it's going to be helpful for clinicians and patients. And it also is going to be helpful for research and discovering evidence. And so there's this sense of, yes, it might be an early iPhone, but it's been rare that I've seen technology have as much potential as this one is posing right off the bat.
Gotcha. Now, as someone who's in this I think really unique position of having clinical experience and also experience in the informatics and the AI side, are there any concerns or pitfalls that maybe some people aren't even thinking about that we should be?
Yeah. So the idea of responsible AI is really important. So how do you keep a human in the loop? How is it learning in an equitable way? How are we helping to use the tools? Again, right place, right time. And how do patients interact with it? So I'm actually excited about the equity angle for this because I can, for example, say, please write this as you would to a 4-year-old, or please write this in Spanish so it could translate, or let's make sure that we're using language that would be specific to how someone might interact with a neurodegenerative disorder or something like that. So it's a really neat way to be able to connect with a more human voice without always needing to generate it just yourself.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was hearing about this where it can help to translate a lot of the medical terminology to bring the information to where the patient is at.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about in-basket, but there's a few others. So patient instructions is going to be really exciting because instead of pulling it maybe from a third party or something that doesn't necessarily resonate or speak to the patient, you can kind of speak in their language what their instructions should be, and which is a mundane task that we usually do. Sometimes it's copy-paste, but now it'll be not only fun, but also engaging and specific to the patient. And same thing again, inbox, patient instructions, going through documentation, all of these really pose us as clinicians the new opportunity to rethink how we're doing our workflows, rethink how we're engaging with our patients, maybe move the computer aside a little bit and have a lot more direct interaction. Also helps us connect with patients even when they're not in front of you in the exam room. So I'm excited about it.
That's exciting on the other side too, because I know these days there's a lot of technology that's working very well to get more information to patients. Like we can go into and if we have lab results coming in, my wife and I can see them right away, but we haven't actually gotten the doctor's interpretation yet. So we're kind of reading through and looking at different values and Googling stuff, which is smart. Maybe calling up my wife's uncle, who's a pediatrician, even though we're adults, and all of that. So this is really exciting to hear that it'll close that gap.
Yeah, it will. And you're exactly right. The concept of workflow is one, but the concept of empowering patients with information is another. And that's one of the things that I think this is really going to change.
That's great. That's wonderful. So AAMI, of course, is focused on medical devices, people who are working on medical devices and the medical device manufacturers. Is there anything that this group, AAMI's membership, should know about AI that maybe they wouldn't think to ask about?
I would go back to the responsible AI topic. I think as all of us in the community in informatics are thinking about how to deploy this, where to deploy it, how to include the human in the loop, each of those are going to be discussion points that we need to continue to follow up with after we get more sort of real world evidence, if you will, of how this goes. So it's an iterative process. So we'll have I gave the example of in-basket. We'll have people giving us responses, clinicians, patients, et cetera, on how it actually worked. And then the goal would be to try to narrow that into the way that it's going to be best to interact between patients and providers and clinicians.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, your session was so illuminating, the other day. And just thanks so much for coming out.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much.